Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our webinar this lunchtime. My name's Sarah and I work in CAFOD's campaigns team, and I've been working with lots of other organisations in the Climate Coalition for the upcoming Week of Action. We're now less than 2 weeks away, and during the week we'll be seeing hundreds of people up and down the country holding events in their local areas and inviting their MPs to join in. We'll see nature walks, tea parties, community energy visits, and all sorts of other events to get those vital conversations started on climate change. So I just checked on the Speak Up map before I came on the call, and there are currently 160 events planned. So thanks if you're one of those people who've organised an event. So whether you're finalising the details for your event, thinking about attending one, or have just joined us to find out a little bit more about speaking to your MP, it's great to have you with us today. So just before we start, if you're meeting your MP during the Week of Action, please do take along our MP briefing. So I enclosed it with the email that went out before the webinar, and it outlines the asks for the Week of Action, which are to congratulate the government on their progress on ratifying the Paris Agreement last year, and to ask the government to publish an ambitious low-carbon investment plan in line with the Climate Change Act. And I'm sure lots of you will have your own asks that you'd like to put in as well related to your constituency. If you haven't already seen the document, you can find it on the Week of Action page at www.weekofaction.org.uk under resources. So I'm delighted today that we're joined by two brilliant speakers, Jo Musker-Sherwood from Hope for the Future, who'll be providing some top tips on making the most of your meeting with your MP, and George Marshall from Climate Outreach, who'll be talking about using climate change language in a way that appeals to people across the political spectrum. Both our speakers will talk for around 15 minutes, and then there'll be time afterwards to ask questions. If you have a question, please type it into the question box on your screen, or click the button shaped like a hand next to the mute, and then we can unmute your mic so you can ask the question yourself. And I know some of you are listening on the phone, so if you have any questions, just email them to me at scroft@cafod.org.uk. If you find yourself having problems with the technology or unable to hear, please type it into the comment box, and we'll also send a recording out of the talk and the slides afterwards so you can listen again. So first up, we'll hear from Jo Musker-Sherwood from Hope for the Future. Together with churches from across the UK, Jo has been working to find ways of communicating the urgency of the climate crisis to UK politicians. Over to you, Jo.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm sure that should be fine. I'm hoping you can see my presentation there as well. Let me know if there's any problems. Great, okay. So Hope for the Future has been working with the Climate Coalition and local groups and faith communities around the country, really to look at the nuts and bolts of what makes for effective MP engagement. How can we encourage MPs to think and feel differently about climate change, and to get a sense of the urgency of the climate crisis and go on to make tangible action? We're sort of thinking about how can we draw MPs to be a part of the movement so that they see climate change as in the best interests for their constituents in the UK as a whole, and as sort of economically, socially, politically viable. We focus as well on how we can encourage them to think about climate change as something that relates to what matters to them most, perhaps why they went into politics in the first place, their own strategy that they have within their constituency, and in particular sort of avoiding ways of presenting climate change that would require them to sort of severely compromise the essence of their own politics or their own identity. So I'll talk a bit more about why we've taken that approach, but in the main, our focus is on sort of going around to where an MP is, what their existing values are. We've worked or built a lot on and used a lot the work of Climate Outreach, and George, who'll be speaking later in doing that, to try and get the best out of an MP meeting. What we found when we started sort of accompanying people to meet with their MPs, and that's what a lot of these photos here on your screen are, is that MPs were sort of displaying what we call defensive behaviour, or like to think of as defensive behaviour. So some of you might recognise this if you've met with your MP before. Maybe you have a fantastic MP, but we saw quite a few MPs doing this sort of a thing. So holding the party line, refusing sort of to have an intelligent conversation with him. Well, the government thinks this and the government thinks that, rather than how they actually think or feel. Controlling the conversation so you can't get a word in edgeways. Actually seeing quite a few MPs sit on their mobile phone whilst they're trying to be engaged by their constituents. Refusing concrete answers, so, you know, I wouldn't like to say this, or I wouldn't like to say that. You have to have a very balanced opinion, so I wouldn't commit on this just now. One that surprised me is deliberately antagonising as a sort of time-wasting technique. A story I often tell is about an MP who said, you know, everyone has their pet issue, don't they? Climate change, the NHS, and he just knew someone in the room was going to go, you can't say that. And so they had a debate, and this person lost their rag, and time was up, and off he went, and he hadn't had to commit to anything. Sweet talking, saying all the right things, and going on and doing nothing. These were the sort of things that we were seeing MPs do, and we wondered, you know, what's going on behind that? What's the mindset of an MP that you know, how can we connect with the human being behind this sort of glass wall of the MP persona? And we thought, you know, a lot about the position that MPs are in with the heavy time restraints, that it's sort of they're probably going to have another 10, 15 meetings that week with constituents, all with things that they want doing. So they're going to be, like anybody, looking to sort of minimise their workload, particularly if they have a role in Parliament. They have to know about so many different areas. Chances are they're not actually going to be that knowledgeable about climate change, and they're rather keen for that not to be exposed. They may feel that they're in a difficult position if they are aware, particularly if they're a Conservative MP, of government changes in climate policy, and they're in a difficult position in sort of not wanting to criticise their own party as well. But also they may have, and unfortunately a lot of MPs do have, a poor opinion of the climate movement as alarmist, as sort of confrontational, black and white in its thinking. And so a sort of, if it's the first time meeting with your MP, a sort of preset idea of how the conversation is going to go, and be on the defensive already. So we've sort of started to think, you know, how can we create a sense in which, you know, we can take down these barriers, create a sense in which your MP is your ally, that there is a sense in which, yes, you know, we can work together even if we have very different politics and we completely disagree even on the climate science. So just some general points really for advice when meeting your MP and sort of building that relationship and building that trust with your MP and that listening ear. I generally would completely ignore or refuse to engage with any areas of disagreement that is even faintly subjective. By that I mean, for example, you know, the government is doing fantastically well on climate change, or, you know, we're meeting all of our targets, or, you know, this climate change, we just don't have to worry because everyone's doing so brilliantly on it, or those sorts of things. Or, as I mentioned, the pet issue, anything really, especially if you suspect that it might be a time-wasting technique or deliberately there to sort of rile you. I would just really ignore the areas where you don't agree and focus on the areas where you do agree. Listen to what their values are, and reflect back any concerns that they have as well, to show that you can, you're happy to sort of see both sides of an argument. If very often an MP will say, well, yes, this climate change thing is really important, but, you know, I can't deal with this anti-growth stuff, it's never going to win over the public, or I can't tell all of my constituents not to fly or not to have a car, that's not what democracy is about, or there's a real problem with renewables, they're not very reliable. And often there is some truth in what's being said, not the whole truth, but a truth, and sort of reflecting that back and showing an openness to that is really helpful. I've often made the mistake of trying desperately to convince them otherwise, and they've ended up sort of shutting down. And then trying to be as encouraging as possible without sort of compromising your own integrity. If you're meeting with a Conservative MP next month as part of the Week of Action, One of the first things you can start with is what great news it is that Theresa May has announced she will ratify the Paris Agreement by the end of the year. That's a brilliant sort of thing to start with. And also, you know, have a look at, we'll go into how to research your MP in a second, but if there's things that your MP has campaigned on locally or nationally that you get behind, that you like, start with that. Start with a sense that, you know, you can work together, you have a sense of respect for them. And there, you know, there's a discretion, there's a reason why your vote is anonymous. If you haven't voted for your MP, I'd really encourage you, you know, not to disclose that in any way in terms of your the way that you are with your MP, and you go in there with a true sort of demonstrating a willingness to work with them, even with the most difficult of MPs. And the reason why I say that is because we've seen MPs, even very challenging MPs, do real sort of U-turns in their thinking on climate change, and they've gone on to take tangible action, simply because the trust and the relationship has been built, and it enables you to go on and ask the kind of robust, challenging questions that just wouldn't have been possible at the beginning, where the MP just would have completely shut down. So that's sort of ideas for when you're in the meeting. In terms of the preparation for the meeting, I think that's really important. There's a fantastic website, theyworkforyou.org.uk. On there you can see what your MP's roles are in Parliament, how they've voted, and especially important, how they have they spoken in Parliament, have they spoken in debates, have they raised questions. That will tell you what your MP's passions, interests, values are, and give you an idea of what areas to focus on with them and where you're going to find some common ground with them and where you might be able to work together. Have a look at their website and social media. What are their local campaigns? How do they see themselves in the community? How do they see their role? Do an internet search. Talk with others in the constituency. What are the local issues relating to climate change? What are the things that they're going to want to be seen to take action on? And also, I found it really useful to speak with their PA, the person that you've been organising probably the event with. They will probably have some really good ideas of the kind of thing that your MP would be interested in helping with, and give you some feedback on what you're planning. And they're usually very helpful. Once you've just sort of had an idea of what your MP's interest might be, we then as a campaign go through several sort of bullet points of things that work particularly well as issues to raise with MPs, and these are some of them. So I would highlight maybe one or two issues that you particularly like to focus on. So health, that's active transport, air pollution, heat waves, other things. Farming, rural affairs, seasonal changes. Community energy, I think, is a really important one. Particularly for centre-right or conservative audiences, you know, supporting small business, the idea of communities saving money, taking control of their own energy consumption and production. A lot of people can get behind that. Flooding, fuel poverty and insulation is another one that crosses the political spectrum. Industrial strategy, this sort of in constituencies where, for example, there are high energy-intensive industries, that might be something that you want to avoid, or it might actually be something you want to focus on. For example, we did some work recently in a constituency where there was a lot of car manufacturing. We did some work on electric vehicles, and that was really successful. Education and eco-schools as well. Okay, so those are kind of issues. And once you've decided what you want to focus on with your MP, then how would you go on and frame your asks? Some ideas for that. So obviously the MP briefing pack includes an ask which is for your MP to write to the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy about the low carbon plan and releasing that in good time. But you might want to bring other issues, other asks, other outcomes to your meeting or event with your MP. So what can our MP do for us and what can they offer us? Well, one of the most useful things that an MP can offer is how the political system works, and more importantly, why certain policies are like they are. They can give us a more complex and comprehensive understanding of the issues, and if they don't know, they can find out for us. They can also give us a really good knowledge of the constituency. They've probably had constituents on the other side of the argument, saying my fuel bills are too high, or I've lost my job in this high energy industry, or whatever it is. So they can give you really good insight into what the values and concerns are of your local community and how you can speak to those. They can also give you good indicators about how to talk about climate change, and that's basically you can learn from the language they use, and that's what George will go on and talk about. In terms of tangible things your MP can do, I think one of the most important things that MPs as public figures can and should do is to raise the visibility and break the cultural silence around climate change. So to put things in newspapers, on their website, to speak at an event. You can also ask them to lobby internally if you sense that this is something they are actually really interested in. You can ask them to spearhead a local or national campaign to, it might be on electric vehicles, it could be on cycle paths, it could be on air pollution, it could be on climate change itself. You can ask them to raise the issue in Parliament, to even call a debate in Parliament, to even pass a bill in Parliament if they're really passionate about it and you've really onto something that you think could bring tangible change. You can also ask them to forward a letter as well to relevant people in the government expressing your concern. So these are things, some of the ideas that we have of what we can actually ask MPs to do for us and what they can offer us. And I'm just going to finish off with a little bit about what are some of the opportunities and challenges with the various different types of events that are going to be going on during Speak Up. Actually, before I do that, I'll just finish off with this point about setting goals for your meeting. When you have decided on your asks here about what you'd like your MP to do, one of the checklists that I use for myself is this here, setting goals for the meeting. Whatever you're asking them to do, whatever you're asking them to engage with, will it gain them votes? By that I mean, will it be something that they would be pleased to be seen to be doing something about, that their constituents will get behind them with? I think that's really important, because it is their job to represent the views of constituents. Is it in line with their values? Is this going to create more of the world that they would like to see, and how they think the world should be? Are they equipped for it? Do they need further information from you? Is it in line with previous job experiences that they've had, or travels, or roles in Parliament? Is it grounded in the local as well as the national, like some of those issues I mentioned before? And is it smart? Many of you will have heard of this already, but is it all specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely? And like Sarah said, these slides will be sent around at the end, so you'll have that to be able to look at. So just finishing off, different types of MP engagements here. Some of you may have a formal meeting with your MP, so at their surgery or at your own venue. And the opportunity for that is obviously a very in-depth and constructive conversation about climate change. You can really get to grips with where they're at, where you can work together, things you can ask them to do. The challenge, of course, with that is that it's a more confrontational sort of setup. They're more likely to be on the defense. And so I hope that some of these things that I've sort of shared with you will be helpful for those of you meeting your MP in that setting. For others of you who are holding more of a sort of community event where your MP will come along to a nature walk or a tea party, the opportunities there is obviously that it's a lot less confrontational. There is a real opportunity for your MP's attitude change, to participate in something that you think, yes, I like this and I want to be part of this, without the sort of conversation being derailed by talking about hugely controversial issues. But of course the challenge with that is that you may hardly get any time at all to actually talk about climate change, and knowing some MPs, they may use that opportunity to talk endlessly about how fantastic the tea and cake is or how beautiful the view is, and not really wanting to talk about climate change. So it'll be really important to have a sense of what you'd like to get out of that meeting, and for that sort of community event to be an opportunity to lead on to something further. It will give you an indicator of the issues to follow up with afterwards, where to focus on in future. And if you don't get the chance to ask your MP what you'd hoped to, definitely send them a thank you letter for coming to the event with a, would you be willing to do this, in there as well. And you might be doing an event that's a combination of the two, where you sort of got a nice event and then a 20-minute question and answer or something like that, in which case you've got the opportunities and challenges of both. I think I'll stop there, and I'm not sure if we're taking questions now or after George has spoken, but that's sort of my bit done.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so we've got 10 minutes now for questions, if anyone has them for Joe. So just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, type it into the questions box on the side, or click the hand button and we can unmute your mic. So just, I thought I'd kick off with a question we've received from Jill, who is on the phone, and you alluded to this slightly in your presentation, Joe, but she said, I'm fortunate in my MP Andrew Smith in that he supports our numerous, if unsuccessful, attempts to get some realistic answers from the government about keeping 80% of fossil fuels in the ground. What I want to know is what else can we ask him when letters aren't working? The one idea today is for him to put a question into Parliament. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely, as a question into Parliament, raising the profile, but actually standing up in Parliament and asking a question. Like I mentioned, if there's something that he feels, I mean, a good question for him would be, you know, if you think there was one thing you think this government could be doing better on climate change, what would that be? And see, you know, see if there's anything focusing on something he's particularly would like to see the government doing more, and it might be a particular form of renewable energy or you know, air pollution or some of those other issues that I mentioned. And if he'd be interested in really kind of taking the lead on that on a national level, yes, raising the issue in Parliament, but doing some internal lobbying and possibly sort of even calling a debate, depending on what his enthusiasm levels are. But certainly the next port of call would be to raise a question in Parliament from my perspective.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. Ellie, have you got any more questions?
Yeah, we've just got one that's come in online, and it's just really at the other end of the spectrum from Joel's MP. So if your MP hasn't replied to the email about meeting you, how should you follow up with them?
Okay, your MP should absolutely meet with you. They have an obligation to meet with you as part of their job, and I find it really frustrating when I hear that MPs sort of treat constituents like that. Ring the constituency office and speak to the PA, send another email. I mean, sometimes we've had to try really, really hard to get hold of MPs. In the end, I have sometimes ended up using social media. I sent a tweet and said, you know, hey, would love to meet with you. Be great if you could get back to me, and that got a reply within half an hour. So just sort of just keep on going, because actually there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't meet with you.
Thanks very much, Joe. And just one more from online. How regularly do you think I should meet with my MP to talk about climate?
The coalition, the Climate Coalition, is sort of planning these Speak Up mass lobbies once a year for the next 5 years, and that seems like a good amount of time to sort of with that sort of regularity to build a good relationship with your MP. If you have a particularly sort of enthusiastic MP, then you know the opportunities are endless almost to invite them to events, to work specifically with them on a local or national campaign. It may be that you schedule to meet with them in 3 or 4 months' time. That's something I often do when we're meeting with MPs, and say, ask them, when shall I come back and see you again? And the MP will say, you know, they might say, come back and see me next year, or they might say, come back in a few months' time. But certainly at least once a year, and possibly more if there's the enthusiasm there from your MP.
Great, thank you. Just two more questions just come in as you were talking. The first is from Jed, and he asks that one of the latest asks from CAFOD is to write to congratulate the PM for his commitment to the Paris Agreement. How should we put this for Labour MPs who might not want to do this?
I would say, yeah, I mean, I would say it's a tricky one, isn't it? It's a really good question. Just off the top of my head, the way I would phrase it would be, you know, there've obviously been a lot of concerning changes in climate policy since the government have come in, and a lot of people have questioned the government's commitment to action on climate change, which will sort of speak to the opposition MP. But it's been fantastic, and I'm so pleased to hear that the ratification will be going ahead, and to have that commitment from the government after such a period of uncertainty, and he should have no problem passing that. I mean, and whatever you put, he's got to pass it on anyway, but that would be a way, hopefully, of not breaking that relationship with your MP whilst also sort of being encouraging to the government.
Yeah, great, thank you. And now we've got two more questions that's come in. The first of those is from Chloe, and she says, thank you very much, Jo, this has been really useful.
Thank
my
you.
MP is new into post. Would this be something I can work with? And do you think that this will be a positive thing?
Yes, definitely. Especially MPs that are new into post, because they haven't yet sussed out which particular areas they definitely want to focus on. We found MPs that are new into post are easier to work with, because also they're not quite so used to the fobbing off of people. They haven't learned certain skills, and they're looking all the time to build their networks, build their supporters, build the people in the constituency that they can rely on and have a good relationship with. So I think that's really important. And one thing I'll mention is, as part of the Speak Up, or anyone wanting to work with their MP, we'd be happy to work one-to-one with anybody who would like some advice working with their MP, who kind of like us to sit down and go through this process with them in figuring out how to work with their MP. So we're very happy to do that.
Great, thank you very much, Jo. And finally, from Steve, do you have any suggestions to any websites, books, resources, or anything where I can learn more about climate change to be more confident when talking about it, and not just talk about the basics?
Okay. If you want to learn more about talking about climate change, then the best book I know out there is Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change, and it's written by George Marshall, who'll be speaking in a minute. The website that I use for sort of climate skeptics and debunking myths is Climate Skeptics, it's called. I can't remember that it's .com or .org.uk, but if you put into the internet Climate Skeptics, I found that really useful.
I think it's Skeptical Climate, Jo.
Skeptical Climate, is that right? Or maybe we're thinking of two different ones. I'll send it round with the PowerPoint at the end. I'll put the address on the PowerPoint at the end, but that's a website that I find really useful. I don't know, George, if you've got any books that you think are particularly outstanding other than your own.
That's very nice of you. No, no, I don't think so in particular. I think you'll find all over the internet there's good facts and queries. Yeah.
Oh, the other thing, just one thing I would mention is the Climate Change Committee. They've got some fantastic reports on what the UK needs to do to prepare for climate change, how we're meeting our targets, what our progress has been, and because it's a government body, it's credible. So I'd really recommend taking a look at that. They produce a yearly report, and the Royal Society have done some really good things on climate change as well, and again, that's a very credible source.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jo. I think the one thing that I took from your talk, which I hadn't perhaps thought of before, was liaising with an MP's PA and getting their thoughts on their MP. It was a great tip. So next up on the agenda, we'll be hearing from George. So George has 25 years experience working across the environmental spectrum, from local community groups to senior positions in Greenpeace and the Rainforest Foundation to consultancy work for governments and businesses. As you've just heard, George writes widely on climate change issues, and that includes two books: Carbon Detox, which addresses personal behaviour, and Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change, written for a general public audience on the psychology of climate change. So over to you, George.
I hope everyone can hear me now. Hello. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, so I'm going to go through this fairly fast to cover the ground, and please by all means ask me any questions you have. Oh, I'm sorry, for some reason I'm not getting the screen. Oh, there we are, lovely. So these are the key principles I'm going to talk about of how we can talk to people so that they really hear us. And these are principles which apply actually for any situation, for social situations, for talking to people in your family. There's nothing special about MPs in this regard. You start with a position of respect, as Joe has been saying so well, you respond to their values, what they're concerned about. You're seeking the common ground. And many of these points I'll explain later on, of speaking from the I, speaking for the silent majority. And I'm going to unpack these a little bit. Let's start with respect, which of course spills over into values, respecting what's important to them. We know that it makes a huge difference to the tone of a conversation if you come in from a position of respecting. I know it's sometimes hard to respect people if you really fundamentally disagree with them, but try to see them as human beings who are doing the best job that they can. As we've heard from Joe, politicians are balancing different demands. They're often very hard working. They're doing their best to represent their constituents. They are trying in their minds to make a better, place, so wherever you live. And I think it's worth reflecting that in what you say. Respecting that, recognizing that. No harm thanking them personally. No harm starting off your conversation by saying, and may I thank you for the fantastic help that you gave us last year in defending our school, or some activity they've been involved with. I think we all like to feel validated and respected, and it sets things off on a very good tone. That then leads on to the issue of values and what people stand for. In communications terms, we always in climate outreach say start with people's values and build from that. So start from who they are and what they care about and how we can engage with that, rather than starting from what you want to say to them and how to somehow hammer it into them. Let's ask a question then. So what are the values of MPs? Well, across the board, I would say public service. MPs as a whole have a value that they are doing this as a contribution. Now, you might not agree about your individual MP or MPs generally. That's not the point. The point of speaking to people well is responding to what they think they are. So, public service, dedicated to that. Of course, they also have a value of success and being recognized for success, of achieving personal career success, of winning elections, and of being well respected for what they do. Generally speaking, MPs are people who are ambitious, and that reflects to a value that they have about opportunity. They tend as a group to be motivated by a positive vision. There's always a risk with us on climate change that we engage maybe too much in negative visions of how bad things can be. So talking about the potential for doing things better. And of course, politicians like to have something left behind them. So language which talks about, which recognizes how the action we're asking them to take is so much in line with public service giving some back, and can actually leave something really strong and visible behind them, making your area, your town, a better place. Now, I've talked about so far, I think these values cut across political boundaries, but I really want to go in detail on this issue of the partisan divide. It's really, really serious. It's probably the single greatest obstacle that we have to deal with for MPs, as with the whole population. And MPs simply reflect that, but actually rather markedly so. This was a poll of MPs that was done in a couple of years ago. And you'll notice the division there between Labour and Conservative. But the number of Conservative side politicians who think that climate change is an uncontestable established fact is less than a third. Far, far more of them think that it has not been conclusively proven. And very disturbingly, on the right-hand chart, the ones responding to a message it's environmentalist propaganda with little supporting evidence are massively conservative. So there's a division right down the middle. We have to find ways of engaging better with people of conservative politics, and that includes conservative values, because there are, as we know, quite a few people in the Labour Party who have centre-right values, or Lib Dems too. And I think they're also in power. We have to find a better way of speaking to that. So what might those values look like? Well, we've done a lot of work on this, and I personally have spent a lot of time sitting in focus groups, listening to people, grassroots conservative centre-right values. These are the kind of things to talk about. Common sense. What we're talking about here is just common sense. This really makes good sense, this kind of language. This is a balanced approach. We are balancing, remember I said MPs are always balancing different demands. You know, action on climate change is a wonderful way of balancing the different demands we have, of having a secure energy supply combined with British jobs, combined with taking good action on the climate change. This seems very sensible, very well balanced. We like this kind of language. We like traditions and landscapes, talking about how this is what we do here. I mean, say, you know, here in Birmingham, this is what we do. We make things, you know, we have a workshop of the world. This action on climate change fits very well with us. Landscape, of course, this is the opposition to wind farms. That's maybe another issue we can do on questions. But landscape, climate change is going to severely affect landscape. Conservatives see environment in terms of landscape often. This is a key frame for them. Community, what things will do for the community, national identity. You know, Britain is a country where, you know, we'd like to get things done. Definitely talking about how we're leading the world on this. A sense of giving back too, a way that things can contribute back into society. And conservatives have a very strong idea of how we can always aspire to be better. We can do this better. Surely we can do this better. Surely we can aim higher. We have immense potential in this country for wind and for solar. We can reach out to that potential. This is all language which works well with centre-right values. And I have to say it doesn't fundamentally conflict with anything on the left either, so it's safe territory. Let's have a look now at the moment of what is not centre-right values, and this is really important. Many of us in the climate movement have progressive centre-left values, and the danger is we go into engaging with conservatives projecting those centre-left values in a way which does not establish common ground. So I'll highlight for you what these are. I'm not saying that these are not important issues for you. I'm just warning you that if you go into these areas, you're going into territory which is potentially getting them going, no, this isn't what I do, this isn't my kind of thing, I'm not interested. My view is, and as Joe was saying, is find the common ground and as far as possible maybe avoid the territory which are going to be spark areas. They don't like grand theories, talking about the big theory of climate change, talking about any kind of like big ism-driven approach, grand plans. They don't really like this. They like decentralized power and manageable, sensible solutions, right? Therefore, radical change, revolutionary language does not work well. They are wary, and it's a very mixed area here, but they are wary of language around social justice and equality, as you can imagine. I'm not sure that these are things which necessarily need to come in. They can be framed in different ways if you need to make a point about it. These words actively need to be avoided. Language based on victims, about how we have a responsibility to the people who will drown in Bangladesh. I'm not saying conservatives are bad people, but this language which is about victims doesn't work for them. It would be much more about how we can help and support the people in Bangladesh to become the potential for what they are, and how climate change could damage that is much more how they would respond. Fuel poverty, we've tested this across the country. Arguments about fuel poverty work well with the left, very well. They work very badly with the right. Therefore, with conservatives, you don't necessarily need to go there. Talking, we have a right to something. Surely our children deserve to live in a world. These are left-wing words that they don't like. And reflections of protest, disrespect for authority. Obviously, Joe hasn't mentioned it, but in the briefing notes, dress appropriately for your MP. If you have a Conservative MP, look reasonably sober and well dressed. This is not. There's no great advantage of going in there in your Smash the System T-shirt. If you want to find the common ground and use this precious moment of opportunity that you have for trying to move them forward. So don't necessarily bring to the fore actions of protest with this group. Right, so common ground, as Joe has already touched on, we're trying to find the area where if you're different from your MP, and that doesn't rule out the possibility of anyone on the call or lobbying has conservative values and you're lobbying somebody strongly left, the same thing applies. Don't go for the areas of saying this is what makes you different for you. Go for the areas of common ground. The key one is locality, how we both love where we live but don't let them get too distracted on that, which, as Joe warned, they could do. The short, how the things that we all have in common, we're all concerned about. Speaking from the I emphasise here the big danger of climate change is that it becomes talked about as an it. And Joe's already warned about this thing where politicians can go on and they can start talking about, well, the government thinks this, or this is our policy. It's all language around the it, and technical discussions can get drawn into that. In all of our training work, we always recommend people to speak from the I. So, not in an egotistical way, but going in there and saying to your MP, saying, I really want to explain to you why this issue is important to me, as a person and as a constituent, and why I want to raise it with you. If you keep it on the I language, you're encouraging the MP to occupy that space as well, which is really where you want them, not drifting off into some kind of like ambiguous government speak, but actually in a position where they're engaging with this personally, which quite possibly they might not have done before. That's again why we're trying to keep things to common ground. So when you speak for the I, you're achieving a balance, or you're aiming to have a balance of saying, this is why climate change is important to me, Mr. Smith. This is why I wanted to meet with you today. But I also want to say that there are many, many other people in our community, amongst your constituents, who care very much about this issue. And often they don't have a chance to talk about it. But we know that they care deeply. And if you can find anecdotes for that, all well and good. The impression you're trying to give is that actually there might be quite a lot of people out there for whom they care about this, and it might be the sort of thing which affects the casting of their vote. If you're going in as somebody who appears like an activist, an MP may listen to you or not, but they will not see you as representing a wider constituency. So speak to that wider group if you can. So again, speak to as far as possible, anecdotes. Say, we've been talking a lot recently. I had a conversation just yesterday in our corner shop about how worried people are about the extremely strange weather that we're having at the moment. So always try and open up from the I to a wider sense of ownership of these issues. Now, of course, a key opportunity, if you can draw it in, is where your MP's peers might lie. So again, if you have a Conservative MP, say, I very much welcomed the statement in the papers yesterday by Lord Deben, the former Minister of Environment under Margaret Thatcher, who was saying such sensible things on this. Again, always trying to draw in the fact that people who if you had a strong left-wing Labour MP, Jeremy Corbyn is so strong on this, always showing out to them that people within their peer group of the people they look to and respect hold this position strongly. Again, no point citing somebody from the other side of a divide. So no point telling somebody on the Labour Party how great the Conservatives are, or vice versa. Try and find people within their own peer group. So let's put all of that together into something. And this is not you don't want to go in with a script because you want to, you want this to look natural. But this is how all these points might hang together. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for meeting me. I wanted to meet you today because I am deeply concerned about climate change. Make it specific. The weather, as we know, is absolutely weird, and we know it's the hottest year on record. I went past St. Mary's Churchyard, and spring flowers are coming out 4 months early. Again, stuff which is specific and local. I've been talking with the farmers around here. Say I live in a rural area. Things which connect in that way. And again, this point I was making about how many other people are also very concerned about that, about this. So try and give them a sense that there's a buzz around it, but there's something else going on. Get in there saying, early on in the piece saying, as I said before, thank them for what they've, not just for meeting you, but also what they've done. Yeah. Maybe if you've been in communication with them before, thank you so much for writing back to me when I raised that issue earlier. I really appreciated you finding the time to take that on board. So thank them for previous things that they've done. We very much appreciate your support. Again, same thing. Why climate change is important for you, where you live, for your place. That's That's maybe even more negative side to why it's important, why you are concerned and why it's important for your place. But try and make it local and specific. Again, we're not talking here about Bangladesh. We're talking here about how the river flooded last year. You know, as we might have seen in the local paper, many projections are saying that this could now become a regular occurrence. We need to stand together in a community. We showed in the flooding how good we are at standing together, how strong we could be. We need to prepare for these future events, both locally, but also we're coming to you to ask you to take a stand nationally on this. We need action at all levels, this integrated cooperative approach. But when we do this also, there are great opportunities in renovating buildings, the buildings we love, talking tradition again, the buildings we love, making them fit for purpose in the 21st century. Lots and lots of work for young people, a chance for them to give back to their community. Again, very conservative values here. And small and medium enterprises. Don't bang on about the opportunities for big business and export-driven markets, because although some MPs care about this, do your research, most don't. Most MPs are concerned about the opportunities for local and smaller businesses. So focus on that. It's a very safe place to be. And if we do this together, well, we love Jonestown. It's a wonderful place to be. And I really think if we take action on this, it's a very sensible and balanced approach to a problem that could make it a far, far nicer place to be. Cleaner, less congestion in the roads, and maybe also by doing that we could make also a world in which we don't have to deal with this growing threat. Again, integrated, sensible, balanced, but focused on a positive vision. Don't forget, however, that, as Joe was saying, to have something there which is asking them to do something as well. And here you can see this is how these various lines sort of relate to what we've been talking about before. We've written 2 reports, or actually we've written 7 reports, but do have a look on our website. The one on the left here particularly we wrote as an election guide for last year, how to talk climate change with the centre right, and you'll find a lot of these ideas in there. The one on the right contains a dedicated section on talking to MEPs, so members of the European Parliament from the centre right, but centre right values are fairly consistent. If you have a Conservative MP, do have a look in there and you'll find some of the specific narratives and language which work for them. If you can stand any more of me, there's a couple of videos we have up. How to talk to a climate change denier, which talks a lot about this thing about speaking for middle ground and respect and so on. And a specific video, which is talking climate change with centre right, which we did for the election last year. And both of those, just search for those terms on YouTube. And here are the things coming up again if you just want to write them down. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, George. We have about 10 minutes for questions. Ellie, have we had any online at all?
Yes, we have. Just one just come in. Regarding affirmation of party line or statements on climate change, we're in Liverpool with a Labour MP that won't be very popular with Jeremy Corbyn or with many of her constituents. Would giving affirmation on Jeremy Corbyn's recent commitment to move away from fossil fuels be good or bad, in your opinion?
I'd say, again, the starting from the principle of where the values of your MP are. I wouldn't talk about Corbyn specifically. I would talk about the Labour Party. I'd say, the Labour Party has always taken a lead on this for years and years, respecting the work that the Labour Party did with bringing in the Climate Act, for example, and we're so pleased to see that the Labour Party is continuing, even now in opposition, to hold the government to account. That would be a safe place to go.
Thanks very much. And Jed is just asking if you can give some advice about talking to Labour MPs who are more left-wing.
It's going to be the same thing almost in reverse. It's going to be taking probably the things that don't work for the centre-right and speaking to them about it. So let me just see if we can just quickly bring those up. There we go. Not literally, some of these won't work, but always we're trying to seek people. Always we're trying to seek people in the middle ground. We know speaking to people on the left rather better than speaking to people on the right, because it is the sort of the main language of many people in the climate movement. So Joe made this point of saying how can communicating to the MP be about the world they want to see? So for Conservatives, the world they want to see is one where people can achieve their full potential. Remember, this is what they want to see, whether they deliver it or not. And a country of opportunity that can move forward. They want things to be better on their own terms. For people on the left, we can use much more mainstream language. We can say, following, for example, the Naomi Klein's arguments in This Changes Everything, her book which came out last year, we can say climate change, taking action on climate change is a way of meeting a lot of our, many of our obligations on other wider issues of social rights and social justice. Absolutely, put fuel poverty right up front there. Fuel poverty is a very good example of a win-win, of how we're reducing our fuel demand, reducing emissions, and actually serving the needs and the rights. You can use all this language of the most vulnerable people in society, who surely they deserve more. And after a hard day, after a hard lifetime's work, surely older people are entitled to have a warm and comfortable house. Okay. So again, you can use this word, and you can say, regarding protest, disrespect for authority, with people of the left, you can say, you know, we'd really like to work with you in opposing some of in supporting strong action, but also in opposing some of the more outrageous things that undoubtedly this government will try to get through. And definitely talk about social justice in there. Okay.
Thanks very much. And there's another question from Stuart, who asks, if your MP change is not established fact, is it wise to spend time trying to persuade them it is? Without recognising human-caused climate change is real, how can we get anywhere?
Well, the starting point on this, as Joe recommended, is do a search around climate change and your MP, and just get a sense. If you have a kind of MP who thinks it isn't a fact, they will have come out and said that publicly. So if you have a very active climate change denying MP, I think, by the way, you don't want to go in there and persuade them. I think it's useful to hold the eye, as I said in the as I say on the online thing about talking about climate denier. Going in there and being prepared to say, well, Mr. Smith, this is your view. I want you to know that many of us in your constituency feel differently about this. And whilst we might not reach agreement, we want you to recognise that your job, that in every other way you do so well, of responding to our needs and of representing your constituents, extends to the fact that we feel very strongly about this. But there is no need for us to disagree or fight over this. Again, they're polarized, we're trying to put them back into the common ground. There's no need for that, because there are actually so many of the things that we need to do anyway. You know, we need to have energy, we need to have a sensible energy policy in this country. Every country in the world is getting out of dirty fossil fuels. There are very good reasons for doing that. A lot of the language already in the campaign world, for example, about fossil fuels being dirty, moving towards cleaner energy, is trying to find language which takes us away from climate change and into the area of just basic common sense. And these people, again, push that common sense line. You know, it's just basic common sense that we should have warmer, healthier, more efficient buildings. It's just basic common sense that we should be moving out of some of these dirty fuels, especially coal. So let's, you know, Mr. Smith, fine, I've said how I feel about climate change. I'd like you to recognize that, but let's put that on one side. There are so many other useful things that we can do, which will be very popular, not just with us in my organization, but with your constituents too.
Thank you very much, George. And there's just a question coming from Patricia, and she asks, I'm not clear about what you said about climate change is not an it. Please, could you explain?
Okay, thank you. By the way, Joe, if you want to come in on any of this, please do. Okay, climate change is not an it. Okay, so in the kind of standoffs you can get, I'm trying to think of these very, very unproductive conversations or almost arguments you can have with people. There's something in that, in the dynamic, and it's often related to the fact that people who actively oppose action on climate change are I guess like me, kind of like middle-aged men who have a particular way of speaking, but it becomes very, very objectified. And that's what I mean about climate change being an it. Climate change is the greatest threat we face. It is now accepted by 97% of the world's scientists. It is this, it is that. This report just said that it. That's what I mean about climate change being an it. And I've sat in conversations, including heated conversations, that have never broken out to be it. Except to say, so we, in some general sense, need to do something about it. Why I stress the I is because, if, especially in the situation of sitting down personally with the MP, you are talking about why climate change is important to you, how you came to be concerned about it, and a lot of reasons that you are concerned. So you're still talking about climate change in every way, but you're framing it within your own personal concern. You could say, the latest scientific temperature readings show that this year has been the hottest on record. Okay, that's the it. The I would be saying, Mr. Smith, I'm deeply concerned that this year it has been the hottest on record, and that last year was the hottest on record before it. And when I hear this, I'm really concerned, not just for myself and the future, but the future of my children. However you want to say it, the point is you're framing the same information within the package of the fact that you, having a face-to-face interaction, are concerned. And that's much more powerful.
Thank you very much. And we just have one final question before we finish the webinar for today. And this is coming from Louise. That was really helpful information. I'm going to find it quite hard to remember all these tips though. What would be the one thing that you would want me to take away from this webinar? And that's for both George and Joe.
Joe, do you want to start on that?
Okay, it's a great question. I think probably the most important thing for me, the thing that I've learned over the last couple of years that's most surprised me, is the importance of getting into the mindset that however much you might disagree with your MP or have a different politics or whatever sort of goes on there, that they are ultimately have to be your ally, and it's our job to find a way, and their job as well, to find a way for you to work together. So that is a mindset going into the meeting, of just like you would with any other thing that's vitally important, and you know that this person holds a certain degree of power in tackling this issue, of sort of just remembering that it's so important that they must be framed as our allies in the way that we work. That's probably the thing that most sticks in my mind with the work that we've been doing.
I would say there are different strategies on this. I come from a background in direct action, and so there's sometimes something to be said for just going in there and just letting rip, and then just walking away, and you've made your point, and they can make of it what they will. I'm not entirely opposed to the idea that people should be a little bit shocked out of their seat. However, having said that, I think probably the most constructive strategy, as Joe was saying, is one which is trying to be effective on building bridges with a view to building a relationship. The one key thing is thinking, what from this interaction is going to build a relationship, such as when I see them again in a year, they might be glad to see me, they'll remember our conversation, we can start off from that. And with a view to building that, so I guess I'm giving more than one tip. The second one, which we haven't touched on, is in the preparation. You might find it very, very useful to role play this. So, as Joe was saying, if you're trying to get inside the heads of your MP, and especially if you're doing this with a few other people, it feels a little forced, but why not try to have a situation where you practice before you go in, and you've tried to think, what might that person say? So in a role play, not just practicing what you might say to them, but play it with each other, taking it in turns to be the MP, and from what you know about that person, trying to respond in a way. It's just to warm you up, so that when you go in there, you've kind of, you know what I mean, you've kind of got the edges knocked off you, and you're ready to do something which is more focused.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, George and Joe, for your helpful tips. So just to end on, I just want to say, if your MP can't make your meeting during the week of action, you can still let them know what happened by sending them a letter after your event with photos, or trying to get an appointment at their surgery. So you can still demonstrate the amount of people that care in your constituency just after the event. So to end with, I just want to say good luck with your events. We are here to support you in any way you need. We have loads of resources. So if you go to www.theweekofaction.org.uk, you'll find templates on writing a letter to your MP, some top tips, some of the ones we've discussed today, and resources for to take along to your meeting, like the MP briefing. If you think of any questions after the meeting that you'd like to ask, please just email campaign@theclimatecoalition.org and we'll get back to you on that. And just to end with, as Joe said, we are offering one-to-one support for anyone that would like it. So if you would like to speak to Joe or a member of the Hope for the Future campaign one-to-one, just give them a call on the number on the screen, which is 0114 360 1149, or drop them an email. And lastly, to say, we're really looking forward to seeing all the great events that you are organising, so do share them on social media using the hashtag #SpeakUp. So I hope they go well. Thanks very much.